Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really great guest today involved in creating a better tomorrow. So, as our listeners know, as I've mentioned many times on past episodes, I was originally trained as a pharmacist. And while I did practice community pharmacy for several years, my career ultimately took me in some other directions. But I've always really maintained an interest in the space and really enjoyed watching pharmacy evolve, transition from sort of this role of sort of dispenser of medications to really an active part of the disease management equation in 2023 healthcare world. And that's why I'm so excited about our guest today. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Chris Altman, who is Director of Immunization and Clinical Programs at the Rite-Aid Corporation, which is one of the largest United States drugstore chains. They operate around 2,200 pharmacies across the United States. They're headquartered here, actually, in Philadelphia, down the street at the Navy Yard. Dr. Altman got his Doctor of Pharmacy, or Pharm.D degree from Ohio Northern University. Over the past couple of decades, he's escalated in a series of roles of increasing responsibility, from pharmacist to pharmacy manager, into the manager of field clinical services, into his current role as Director of Immunization and Clinical Programs. And we're going to be getting into a lot of themes, again, about how this field has evolved and potentially where it's all going. All that being said, Dr. Chris Altman, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today and talk for a little while.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, I'd love to just start off, as we typically do, by handing you the floor for a couple of minutes, just to further talk about yourself, a little bit of, everything from where you grew up, what got you interested in pharmacy. Did you come from a family that was involved in the business? Was it a summer job as a pharmacy tech? What started off this kind of interesting career that you've been on so far?
Yeah, so my sort of segue into pharmacy as a career actually started when I was in high school. I went to Findlay High School in Findlay, Ohio, in little Northwest Ohio. I did one of those career interest surveys in a social studies class. So it's, I don't know, the 50 questions. Do you like reading? Do you like math? All of that. And at the end of it, it spit out a bunch of healthcare options. And this was news to me. I had never even thought about healthcare as a career. A lot of doctor, a lot of nurse, physician assistant. And then on that list included pharmacist. And I was like, oh, I should see what a pharmacist does. So I started down that path of sort of learning what pharmacist meant. And that we had at the time at my high school a sort of job shadowing project. So I got involved with that, and I did job shadow a community pharmacist at the local grocery store, and just absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed seeing the way the whole team in the pharmacy, from the pharmacist to the technician, was interacting with their patients, interacting with the people that came in and out of the store, and really opened my eyes to sort of this, at the time for me, unknown resource of healthcare information. So really got involved there, took some next steps and did some more research, and then decided to apply to Ohio Northern. So went to Ohio Northern University in the bustling metropolis of Ada, Ohio, went through that program. And then throughout the entire time, really my focus throughout it was on that community pharmacist and the way the community pharmacist engaged. Obviously, there's lots of segues within pharmacy. You can go in hospital and institution, but for me, it was seeing that community pharmacist at the lowest level in the store talking to those customers about their needs. So that really drove me to continue my career in community pharmacy.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I was pulled into the space. My father was a pharmacist, and he was I would say a little more than a generation older than me, and he was from that era where, and I remember this to this day, some of his patients, well, his older customers, would call him doc. Extensive amount of sort of counseling at the counter, a lot of compounding still. And I saw sort of, this respect for him. When I got involved, it was more of an era which seemed like, let's see how many prescriptions we can fill. But the win for, ultimately what happened in terms of disease management and so forth was there. It was coming. Talk a little bit about how, because, I was sort of, I think one of the last years where sort of the 5-year program and sort of registered pharmacy, you have the Pharm.D degree and then a doctor of pharmacy. Talk a little bit about what you saw sort of in your progression from obviously tech into sort of the active practice of pharmacy and seeing sort of disease management come on the scene and realizing, hey, there's a lot more here than fill in whatever 100 scripts per hour. We have a broader role in this.
Yeah, so I graduated in 2007, and even in the short time that I was in school from 2001 to 2007, getting my doctor of pharmacy, a lot of things substantially changed within the pharmacy profession. Immunization practices became a reality for pharmacists. That wasn't something that really was part of the curriculum when I started. So it got interwoven within it. I can even remember when I was in school, it was an optional course to take at one point. So you could get your immunization training. By the time I got to that level, they had integrated it into the regular practice. So that to me was the one sort of initial transition, seeing pharmacists take an active role in that immunization practice. Other thing too, this concept of medication therapy management. So where the pharmacist takes a really in-depth review of someone's medications, looks for drug interactions, looks for disease state continuity to make sure you're taking a med, do you have a matching diagnosis for it? And vice versa. If you have a diagnosis, do you have a matching med for it? That also sort of became reality. Now, I think what's crazy is medication therapy management sort of was the nomenclature for it, but pharmacists had been doing that forever. You think about that pharmacist at the community level having conversations with someone, walking in and saying, "Hey, I've got this brand new prescription. Tell me about it." That was something that was already routine practice. Now we just sort of created that standardized approach to it, and really rolled it out. So those two pieces, while I was in school, really were sort of the hallmarks of pharmacy: the immunization practice and medication therapy management, and specifically how it impacted community pharmacy, because that's where a lot of this was happening. It was at that front line in community pharmacy. So seeing that transition, and you're right, initially it was filling prescriptions, getting those meds in from the doctor, making sure you get the prescription to the customer in a timely fashion. Then it turned into filling that prescription, then having these additional conversations being recognized and making sure that becomes part of our routine practice. And again, it was all happening before. It's just now there's sort of this light shined on it to say this is truly what pharmacists can do and the value they can add to the healthcare system.
Yeah, I've enjoyed, personally watching sort of that initial transition from pharmacy to sort of pharmacy immunization center. I see you a lot, as a spokesperson for the Rite-Aid organization on sort of news channels all over the place talking about, of course, influenza, and that's sort of been I don't think I've gotten a flu shot from my doctor in maybe 2 decades now. The Rite-Aid is right around the corner here, and that's part of my annual health care. Talk a little bit about, if you can, the last couple of years, because I'm sure obviously it's become more than influenza. There's a whole list of possibilities in terms of things that I can get vaccinated for, but also with COVID, a lot of new challenges that came in. Not just that, hey, we're filling the scripts, we're consulting on immunization, but now we have this other thing that's different. Talk a little bit about what that was like for the last couple of years for the organization, and dealing with sort of not just these typical things we hear of, but this unknown.
Yeah, so COVID was an interesting time for community and retail pharmacy. When it initially started, we were really that source of truth to a lot of our customers. So being able to sort of navigate what was in the news cycle, what was being shared from the CDC, and what sort of was myth and legend out in the world. Our pharmacy teams really were able to give reliable information to our customers and help them navigate the stay-at-home orders. How do they get their meds? Things like that. That was sort of our initial. The next step within that, just thinking about the life cycle of what the pandemic was testing. So our pharmacies really stepped up initially to set up drive-through testing sites to make sure that testing was accessible and available to communities. And when you think about healthcare sites and centers for that healthcare to be delivered, community pharmacy was just the next logical step because we're embedded in these communities. We're accessible. We already have sort of that infrastructure from a drive-through perspective to get people out and tested quickly. So that was the next step. And that was a big transition for the profession as well, because we had been doing some nasal swabbing to some extent for flu, but definitely not in the fashion that COVID brought. Following that, it wasn't long after testing was sort of off and running, the vaccine started getting introduced. And again, the pharmacy was tapped based on that access, based on just being in the communities to give those COVID vaccines. So initially, we were out the gates at the end of 2019 giving these vaccines. And through that whole duration of the pandemic, making sure that we had the vaccines ready for people. We were accepting appointments. We were getting people vaccinated as quickly as we could, doing that outreach and follow-up. And that was a pretty substantial stress on our pharmacists and on our system. But what was great was to see how much the profession rallied around it and how it wasn't necessarily a business objective. This was a healthcare objective. And we understood our role in ending the pandemic with that. So it was every resource we had, we threw at this to make sure that we were getting those vaccines rolled out.
And it was interesting. I read an interview that you gave, and you were talking just mentioning about the testing, the extreme amount of testing that you were doing. It was an interesting interview you gave about sort of when the self-test came on the scene, that you sort of had another responsibility here, and that was sort of as almost an internal regulator, in the sense that okay, here we have our Rite-Aid store, and we have literally thousands of products and different goods that there's an FDA that has oversight over these drugs and consumer products and what have you. But there was another level there where you were saying, okay, we have all these tests coming. We, as in your case, you as the Rite-Aid organization, we need to evaluate some of these new tools as well. Talk about what that was like, because I thought that was a very interesting other aspect of sort of your responsibilities during that period.
Yeah, and that's part of that sort of being the gatekeeper of getting good information out to our communities. We understood that this whole unknown of the pandemic and of the virus was, how do we look at what's available, making sure that we give our consumers and our customers the right tools that they have to take care of themselves. So that was really understanding and looking at the trends, looking at when someone has a new test introduced on the market, is it a test that's reliable? Is it a test that gives good results? And really, how does that balance against the overall strategy of disease prevention? So we definitely took an ownership on ourselves to look at that, to say, let's make sure we give our customers the right tools they need. And that was our role, looking at that, evaluating it, making the right decision, making sure that if there was a new test or new technology, we educate our public on it. We educate our customers, we educate our pharmacists so that they can then provide that same information back to their customers at the level of the store.
Awesome. Chris, another really interesting interview that I watched you give, it was on the Pharmacy Times show. And this particular topic was all about sort of the drug screening tests that are currently being sold in pharmacies. And pharmacies obviously always had this very important role, not just in preventing overprescribing, preventing diversion of controlled substances and so forth. But now it seems like this is an active part, unfortunately, in this era that we're in, per opioid crisis and so forth, of having to provide these tests. You were making the point that, again, this is something that we need to understand the products, but provide the proper counseling, because it's not just, if I come in, I'm probably not getting it for me, but I have all
Mhm.
these kids. I got to make sure, they're safe and so forth. Talk a little bit about what's happening on that front, because I think that's as we hear so much about the opioid crisis and whatever fentanyl on the border, we forget about the important tool that pharmacy serves in this whole process.
Yeah, I think what's unique from a way a pharmacist can play that role is really providing that education to the customer. Because obviously you can walk in anywhere and pick up a drug test, take it home and drug test anyone that you're looking for in the family or friends or whoever to kind of get a good balance of what's going on in the world. But I think that next step is, what do you do with those results and how do you interpret those results and what's that conversation look like? And what's great about pharmacy is we are really, really accessible. You can pick the phone up and call and speak to a pharmacist pretty easily, or you can walk in and talk to a pharmacist just in off the street. And having that healthcare provider just be that sounding board to say, if my son or daughter or if my partner tests positive for this, what should my next steps be? What should that conversation be? How do I help them? How do I keep them safe? Even looking at the role that things like naloxone can play, educating on what that is, how that can be used, how you want to really support that person through next steps, whether it be recovery or counseling or whatever that is. That the pharmacist is that great resource as a healthcare provider to help give that. And again, it's timely. It's easy to get that information out of the pharmacy. You don't have to make an appointment. You can generally walk in really anytime the pharmacy is open and speak to the pharmacist about that. I think that's the critical role pharmacy plays in understanding next steps in some of those over-the-counter tests, specifically knowing how do you have that conversation? What tools do you as a healthcare and you as a caregiver, what tools do you need to have for your patient?
A little bit about sort of the digitalization of the business, because this has kind of been we see this trend happening everywhere, and have members of big pharma on health insurers, everything sort of, especially again, we've seen the trend major in the last couple of years, but really this digitalization. I know that Rite-Aid sort of gotten involved. They acquired a company called Health Dialogue a couple of years ago, again, looking at sort of online patient counseling, disease management, again, virtually. What are some of the interesting roles you see for sort of the digitalization, the digital health side of the business, again, in this evolving pharmacy equation?
Yeah, I think the digital environment in pharmacy is really helping get some of that self-service stuff to our customers and to our patients. So being able to digitize an experience and kind of guide the customer through their health journey in that digital space, I think is the big benefit there. So it's not just about punching your refill numbers onto a phone line that then transmits to the pharmacy for us to refill your script. It's being able to go to a website, have a nice seamless experience to request those refills, and then if there's other services you're eligible for, serving those up at the same time. So reminders within the healthcare to say, all right, you're refilling your blood pressure medication. You may also be eligible for this other service. Or
Mhm.
rather than putting that onus on you to always issue your refills yourself, is there a service like an automatic refill program where we can automatically fill that script for you and then digitally let you know through text messaging or email notifications that that prescription's ready? I think that's sort of the self-service side of it. I think the other side is the way healthcare is now looking at population data in that digital space to say,
Mhm.
if we have all this information on customers and we know about our patients, are there things we can start doing for disease management in that space? So look at our customers who are filling blood pressure medications. Do we send them a message or let them know that there's an opportunity to check your blood pressure at the store? Let them know about other complementing things they can do, from maybe weight management or maybe diet management. Just thinking through, looking at that population, looking at the data we have on them to say, what are the best tools to serve up to that customer so that they can take the best care of themselves? And I think that's the space that we can really impact, because we're going to see you often. We're going to see you more than you see your doctor. So
Mhm.
as much as we can know about you to then tell you about your disease state and to help you manage that disease state, it's going to make your results that much better as a patient.
And as you're just mentioning a very important thing, sort of the data and the amazing amounts of data that are being generated, especially for an organization like Rite-Aid that has, as mentioned, over 2,000 locations. An interesting trend actually seen in the wind, chatted a little bit about in the past on the show is this principle of sort of the disseminated clinical trial, where, okay, unlike before, we have all these new tools now. COVID took us in this direction in the sense, we weren't able to get to our doctors. There were, we heard all these stories about clinical trials that patients weren't able to get to. But with the data, with these tools, maybe there's a new way to do these things. And I'm just interested in, is Rite-Aid looking at any of, activity in this area where sort of the pharmacy, not just with the active disease management stuff, but is going to be looking to get involved in ways to enhance, improve sort of clinical trial work?
Yeah, we're definitely looking in that area. We haven't stepped all the way into it, so that's something we're still sort of investigating. The one thing we have done in the past is look at, just clinical trial enrollments. So again, we see all these customers, we have this wealth of demographic data in front of us. If there's a clinical trial, we want to make sure it's got a good mix, and we want to make sure we have the appropriate individuals enrolled. That's an easy win for us. So to be able to engage you at the counter and say, hey, there's a trial you may be interested in, or work with the manufacturers or work with whoever's coordinating the trial to make sure that we're playing our part for that enrollment piece. Because the power of the clinical trial is really based upon having the right individuals enrolled and having a variety of individuals. So you really are reflective of the population at whole. I think that's something that pharmacy can have a huge impact on. Outside of that, then the next steps are actually participating and doing something within the clinical trial. So is it delivering care? Is it doing that follow-up? Is it talking to the customer, collecting, adverse events on some sort of recall? So I think that's all things that we're looking to step into. It's just we're very in the early stages of it at this point.
Sure. No, definitely. It's just once again, it's one of those interesting things you would have expected X many years ago, but they're beginning to happen. So no, it's exciting. Just for the industry overall. One other thing I want to ask you about, because I spent a little time myself back in the day in sort of the pharmacy benefit management space. Again, this was an area that was sort of had sort of freestanding companies. They were at one point, sort of the 1990s, acquired by pharmaceutical companies. Maybe not that. Maybe that didn't play out as well as it should have. Now, pharmacies like Rite-Aid are getting involved in the PBM business themselves. I would just love to sort of, again, get your perspective on how you've seen a bit of that evolve. Okay, pharmacies evolving, sort of your clinical role, the immunization. How about on the PBM side? How have you seen that in terms of not just the way sort of the pharmacist has to get involved in the PBM piece, but I guess the organization overall and helping sort of this cost containment issue that, here we are in 2023. We got a couple $1 trillion still spending on healthcare, but talk about pharmacy and the PBM perspective, if you would, from Rite-Aid.
Yeah, I think so. PBMs is sort of a double-edged sword in the world of pharmacy. Obviously, they manage and control some of those benefits, and they influence our reimbursement rates. So there's always that sort of weird juxtaposition between the two of them. But I think what's really great from thinking about how PBMs and pharmacies can work together is looking at a PBM to say, how can we use pharmacy to complement their efforts? So a big piece of cost containment is prevention, right? So looking at a PBM to say, all right, if they've got a population they're managing, and it is in blood pressure management or it is in diabetes management, your diabetes management is only going to be as good as those customers getting the care they need. So saying, can we work with the PBMs? Can we work with these payers to identify customers that the pharmacist can have a quick impact and say, hey, when's the last time you had an A1C checked? And if they haven't or they don't know, maybe make a recommendation. Say, hey, maybe talk to your doctor next time you're in, or kind of go full circle. If we have test kits at the store for A1C, is it talking to that PBM or talking to that patient and saying, hey, you haven't had your A1C checked for a while. Here's a test kit you can use, working with the payers to sort of understand how does that data share work, and then what are next steps if the A1C comes back? What does that customer do next? So I think that's sort of the great complement of how pharmacies working with PBMs to actually manage that population and think through cost containment as it relates to prevention, cost containment to make sure those individuals are really being treated appropriately against their disease states, and really getting the care they need to self-manage their disease state.
Awesome. Chris, what do you want to see in terms of the future of pharmacy? If we take our crystal ball and we look at 5 years, 10 years, is it more applications of data sciences? Is it medical practice? Where would you like to see the future of pharmacy evolving? And not just from Rite-Aid's perspective, but just as you sit and sort of dream about what are the possibilities here?
Yeah, so for me, I think pharmacy has come a very, very long way from when I was first in school, right? So we talked about immunizations, we talked about medication therapy management. There's been a lot of energy talking about provider status for pharmacists. So I think that's a big key issue for us. And thinking through, any future state pharmacy, having conversations with customers, doing disease state management is going to need a revenue cycle. So we're going to need money coming in for us to do that, which is really, really dependent on having that provider status so we can start billing medical providers, specifically Medicare. So I think that's the next step, provider status. But then from there, the door opens wide. We're doing some innovative stuff with point of care testing where you can come in, you can say, hey, I'm sick, I've got a runny nose, a fever. Our team can do a rapid test to figure out, do you have flu? Do you have strep throat? Do you have COVID? And then it's even more than that. Based upon those results, can we prescribe the right therapy for you? So getting that prescriber status to the pharmacist to say, all right, you've got flu, you've had symptoms for 24 hours. Let's get you antivirals so you get better sooner. Or you've got COVID, you've had symptoms. Let's get you antivirals for, again, you get better sooner. I think that's sort of the next step, is looking through that acute care management within that point of care space. And then from there, it can grow, right? So disease state management today is usually discussing the current meds you're on and having conversations with you. But we could also do things like adjusting meds. So you could be a diabetic who's on insulin and your values aren't accurate. So you've got high fasting or you've got high postprandial, working with the pharmacist to maybe adjust those meds so that you don't have to go to the doctor and you can get that care timely. I think the last piece too that pharmacy has really shined specifically during the pandemic is just understanding the amount of access pharmacy provides. So even thinking through just disease state awareness, thinking through education, having that corner pharmacy where you can walk in communities where there may not be another provider. We have provider deserts all over the place. Saying, all right, the pharmacy is now our provider. So giving us that regulation and leeway to have these conversations and do some new nuanced care, whether it's acute or chronic disease management. I think that's sort of that next step is leveraging that pharmacy as an access point to deliver the care.
Excellent. Really excellent. No, it's exciting times, really exciting times. One last thing, Chris, while I have you, I'm sitting here in downtown Philadelphia, and the Philly Navy Yard is just a couple of miles in that direction. And I know the only reason I get down there, I take my kids down there to practice driving at the Navy Yard. But you do have a beautiful new, very high tech place down there. Do you get to? I know there's the Rite-Aid Collaboration Center with all sorts of things going on. You get to Philly much and get to hang out at the new headquarters?
I do, and it is a beautiful building. Like going in there, it's state of the art. It's when the sun is shining, there's lots of windows, so it's very, very bright. It truly is set up to collaborate. There's the space is set up to host meetings, have engaging meetings. So it's not sort of that typical conference room setting. They're engaging, they're fun, there's a great atmosphere. It's great. Like that, I remember walking in and just being floored by how beautiful the building was.
No, it's nice to see businesses like that set up down there. And Philadelphia is always kind of been an innovative place, but now when you see the Rite-Aids of the world setting up new headquarters there, it's kind of exciting. So I just wanted to point that out. But any final messages for our audience while we have you, Chris, on the future of pharmacy, per Rite-Aids, 2023 initiatives, anything else you want to mention that I didn't touch on, please?
I'm the director for immunization, so I would be at a loss if I didn't tell everyone to go get their flu shots this fall. It'd be great if you got them at Rite-Aid, but if you don't, just make sure you get your flu shot. And then if use your pharmacist if you've got questions about anything in your disease or just hankering that you're thinking about from a healthcare perspective. Pharmacy is a great resource. So Rite-Aid pharmacists are here. We're part of the communities. We want to support our communities. So definitely leverage us as a resource if there's questions or concerns that you have.
Awesome message. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. Chris Altman, Director, Immunization and Clinical Programs, Rite-Aid Corporation, doing really amazing things to transition the future of pharmacy into the future of total healthcare and disease management. Chris, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while about these topics. Obviously, thank you for everything you do to advance the field of pharmacy. And as we like to say on our show here, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow via these different initiatives that you're taking. Really, really nice story. And it was great talking to you.
Thank you for having me. I had a good time.